Greetings to everyone, wherever you're at. Hope you're having a good day. So I didn't have too much planned in the way of a talk title, so I thought up something at the last minute that everybody can feel free to ask questions about, and I'll do my best. And the title is Questions on Emptiness. The teaching of emptiness, things are empty. Ultimate teaching, and it's also a path quality of the Buddha-dharma. So, Sanskrit word that you've been studying for a while, you probably know is shunyata, emptiness. So, but it's not a relative emptiness, it is ultimately empty. That does not mean that it abandons relativity. So if you have questions on it, let's start with that. How about the most intelligent person in here asking a question first? Can you raise your hand? All right, how about the best looking person in here? How about the person with the best question on emptiness?
Yes, I have a question.
Sounds good.
What is the difference when we talk about the emptiness teachings and the third turning or Tathagata Garbha teachings, bowing?
So there's lots of ways of talking about that, as you know. There's just countless words been put together on those, and people saying they understand, they claim, and I'm not here to dispute anyone. If you claim it, then what will I do? I'll say, okay, do it that way. But the way it looks here is that it can show up in all kinds of different ways. That's why it's empty. Not because it's empty. It's because it's empty of any particularity. Sure looks like it's full of stuff. Sure looks like right and wrong. Should be, shouldn't be. Kind and mean. Certainly looks that way. And you'll notice how quickly, not you particularly, but perhaps you are quick to jump to a conclusion about anything if it will save you from not knowing what the hell's going on, which is a kind of emptiness. You want to fill it up with something. What we know, what it should be, and what they did, what they shouldn't have done. Look what they did. Look what they just, what should I do? What should I do about that? We're constantly rotating around in relative truth, looking for some result. This is why the sitting practice of meditation is so powerful over time. So as far as third turning teachings, these are pointing to Buddha nature, and it's just a way of talking about the ultimacy, another relative term, ultimate as opposed to relative, but about talking about the more than likely experiential quality that can show up. Not necessarily experiential, because there's no real experiencer anymore. The path quality is more about, our second turning is more about working with emptiness so that you eventually the grasping at other, the grasping at a self is empty of a grasper, empty of something grasped. Lots of ways of talking about it. Third turning teachings, and that's something I know that you've studied quite a bit. Sokuzan? Specific questions in that area?
I'm bowing. The word shunyata, is that a third turning teaching? Bowing.
Depends on how it's used. If it's used as some kind of this is correct or this is right, then it might be second turning, or still some kind of path quality happening. But if it's used as just what it is, it's just something that's just empty of your imputation about it or your conclusion about it, empty of any kind of singularity that is arising, then it could show up as third turning. And I would also say, if there are any of you scholars out there, and I know there's a few, because I recognize a few of you, want to come in and hang your hat on a hook, in other words, take this up with me as a discussion, I'm always ready. You might find that I don't argue, though.
She's unbound. The second tenet of the order of immediate light is something along the lines of the form that consciousness finds is empty as it appears and full as it is. What is the emptiness of how something appears, bowing?
So it appears, and it's empty of any kind of singularity that's showing up as that other quality. Some boots covered with snow in January, just inside the threshold. It's there, but it's empty of how it appears. It appears, but it's empty of that appearance. More?
Is that a relative emptiness, bowing?
No. So it has a relativity to it. This is why it's so challenging, and why no matter how we twist this or turn it, we can't actually get realization out of it. We might get a highfalutin form of even techno speak around that in terms of all of the teachings, the teachings that you were studying, the third turning teachings. We might get a lot of material around that makes it look like somebody knows something and I don't quite get it yet. Or
She is unbound. The second part of that is that the form consciousness finds is full as it is. What's the difference between as it is and how it appears, bowing?
well, it appears as some kind of otherness. And if it's not pure appearance, then it's contaminated by ideas, opinions, judgments, evaluations, conclusions, all the different, the whole ballpark full of spectators. It's contaminated by that, and it's not wrong. It's just contaminated in the way of emphasizing the singularity, the correctness of this, as opposed to the mistakes being made over here. It's so incredibly seductive to actually conclude that you could be right or wrong about anything. Ultimately, you can be right and wrong about things relatively, but that's the mundane path. Not that you don't have to walk the mundane path for a while, but at some point, the idea here with the spiritual path is you actually transcend your own footprints. Chodo.
Is emptiness something that shows up in the first turning teachings?
Yeah. Idea of a self. There's no self in this skandhas. I mean that. Very provisional teachings. There's no one there. And somebody can actually see that and discover that and start understanding that in a way of seeing that everything they thought they were is not exactly that way. But it's not realization. There's still work to be done, so to speak, or practice to be done.
Sometimes it's talked about empty of self, empty of other. What is that?
What do you think it is? You've been studying it.
Jeez, there's a bug on me.
How many bugs? Just one. I wouldn't call him Jesus. He's over there. Not too much interest in bugs. What kind of bug was it?
It's a little beetle with orange.
Oh, yeah. He's in here quite a bit.
Isn't it?
So empty of empty of self, empty of other. So, good.
Is that distinction of that teaching show up in the second turning? Like, is the first turning just the empty of self?
As far as I understand it, I'm not saying it couldn't show up in other ways, but as far as I understand it. Further questions?
What's the ultimate fullness of emptiness?
So everything, once the emptiness is seen, then the third turning is everything comes back as it is. It's completely full of what it is, not separate. So there's no longer an argument with the apparent itemization of things. You can either itemize, you can do anything you want. You can itemize things. You can do anything you want with it. So you're free of any elaborations that are happening there in terms of what is appearing or what is it's just full rather than it's empty, which is a kind of a nihilistic approach, you could say.
So if it starts looking particular, then what are we doing to it?
If it starts looking particular,
Yes.
what are you doing with the particularity?
Pushing, pulling.
Yeah. So that increases that. So the particularity is not the problem. The singularity is not the problem. The problem is we want something else. We want it to stop doing this and start doing that. We want it larger, smaller, less red, more orange, more, less. Passion, aggression, and ignorance.
Is then when we're doing all that, is the emptiness still there?
Emptiness is there. Is emptiness there?
Is emptiness there?
This is a trick question. You know the answer to this.
I don't know.
Oh, good. Then I'll answer. That way I can't be wrong. What was the question? Is it there? Is emptiness there? Emptiness is a concept that is pointing to, endeavoring is a teaching that points to our grasping at this as a rejecting that and points to that situation because we impute or we give some kind of credibility on the positive side to this and on the negative side of this, or picking and choosing. And it's not that they're relatively things aren't fragrant or smelly. I'm not saying that. We're just saying that that those are only separated by our mind. We separate them out. Answer your question. Yes. Thank you.
Essentially bowing. Does the fullness have an appearance?
It's we describe it that way because there isn't anything else to do. There's nothing else to fix. Things have not. We don't have to hang on to some kind of empty of self, empty of other, empty. We don't have to hang on to that as some kind of something that'll protect us from being flooded with passion, aggression, ignorance, or some kind of warfare. So it's just full. So there's nothing separate there anymore. That doesn't mean that the separations don't show up as they are. But the fundamental understanding is not separate. It's full. It's full, and it's has other characteristics that we could talk about also, like really nice. That would fit for Rumi, wouldn't it? I think so. Kevin, you have a question?
You always know. as you describe fullness, is that another way of talking about luminosity?
Yes. Yes.
What is luminosity, Bowing?
The absence of maintenance. Nothing is maintained. At least that's how it looks here. Unyo.
When you're bowing, as we work with particularly negative emotions, is there something that, a phrase or something that we can use with the understanding of emptiness that can help us through some difficult times?
There might be Atisha's 7 Points of Mind training has all kinds of slogans in there. You might find one in there that you could repeat. But you might keep it very simple. There's no solid self. Whatever the emotion is, there's no one who feels that way. Can't find the person who is angry. You can find anger. It's intense and it wants revenge, or it wants satisfaction, or it wants to find out who the hell did this and why am I feeling this way. I don't deserve this, or all the other things that show up. But that's about someone who is dealing with the energy of anger, which is dependently arisen, and personalizing it, thinking there's someone who has that feeling, someone who's being put upon. And the thing that one of the issues with that is there's a body-mind construct here, organism that this consciousness is working with and through, and we feel like we're somebody. We feel like we are a body, as Dogen Zenji said in the 13th century, way back then, he said, drop off body and mind. He didn't mean get rid of the body. He said, he's talking about the attachment to the body as you, as someone. The attachment to the mind as me, my mind, my thoughts, what I think, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, what's right, what's wrong. Lose it. Drop off body and mind. Profound teaching, and not something you can just say, whoa, I hadn't thought about that. So Dogen, you think, I could just drop off body and mind, that would be it? Well, it might take most of your life to understand that teaching. Or not, perhaps not. Depends on how much work has happened before you showed up here. Doesn't mean there's a mind there. The mind is chattering all the time. You don't have to stop your mind. You don't have to stop your thoughts. Some teachers say you need to do that. What is that phrase? You're begging for something? You know, it's a begging word. Oh, beg to differ. Yeah, that begging word. You don't have to stop anything. You don't have to manipulate, change anything. It's awareness. Awareness, which is not a person, not a self. And if it's anything, it's the Buddha.
For bowing, can I ever empty my ego, or I empty myself?
No. You might think you have, but it's not necessary to empty your ego or empty yourself. Not necessary to do anything with it. Just be aware of it. And then if it needs emptying, it'll empty. If it needs to fill back up because of dependent origination, it'll fill back up. Your job, I would put it in a very blunt way, being your employer right now for the next 3 seconds, is to just observe. That way you'll get your paycheck at the end of the week. Just observe. No conclusion. And if you conclude, then just observe the conclusion. Don't fight with the conclusion that comes up spontaneously that is dependently risen. People are swamped by thoughts they think they're having. You're not having thoughts. Thoughts are having you. I'm not saying this makes it all hunky-dory and you can You can face anything, face losing a job, losing a family member, having your own health fall apart where your own life is threatened. I'm not saying those aren't happening. I'm just saying they are relatively, incredibly real, but they are ultimately untrue. As has been said way before I got here, what is real is not threatened. What is absolutely fundamentally real and valuable and Buddha can't threaten that. That is your true nature. Don't believe anything I say. It's not important to believe it. Use that.
How does relative emptiness help us to see ultimate emptiness?
Just as it's an example, there's nothing in this Tibetan gong, nothing inside, just air. But we see that, so we can use that. Just like the dream we have at night is the sample dream that shows us that this is an illusion, this is a dream. So the relative emptiness gives us an idea how we can move that emptiness into our grasping at some actual quantity or content in something, and see that it is empty of our ideas or our suggestions or interpretations or conclusions about that. So it is, but it is full as it is. If you see what it is, one of the ways of talking about this, if you're ready to hear it, is you're looking at yourself, because you're not separate from anything. That's why it's called like a mirror. It's very much like a mirror, except a mirror is an object that, you know what a mirror does. You look at the mirror and you see yourself in it. But this is mirror-like in that it's not just a mirror, it is like a mirror. But it's the fundamental situation is addressed that way because that's how it may appear to you. But that's still a path. For fruition, there isn't anything else. There isn't anything but you anywhere. There isn't even a you. There's no one, no self, no solid being. But it's extremely convincing when that grasping of self is reinforced by intense anger or intense fear. I don't know if I can do this or not. This is too frightening. You may not be able to. You may have to do something else with your life. This path right here is terrifying. I'm not going to soft pedal anything unless you find out some way to make it feel comfortable. Which you can. You can turn the sitting meditation into a very comfortable, we all got mindfulness, we're all real happy bunch of people because we all meditate. Stand up, raise your hand. Do you have a question? But
You said it's terrifying.
yes.
Why would we want to walk a path that's terrifying?
Yeah, why would we? You know what I tell you? Because you want the truth. And you're not going to settle for it. At least if speaking away, you're not going to settle for anything. You want to know what this is. This is what the Buddha was about. If you have any idea of what actually happened to him, as the story goes, his parents, especially his father, wanted him to just be a king or be a prince. He couldn't do it. He had to go into the forest and find out the truth. He found that out. So therefore, 2,500 years ago, we're still talking about what he discovered because you can discover it. Right?
Is the truth through the terror?
It's not separate from it. Good one. It's not separate from it. Does that make you grin?
It's disappointing.
Yeah. You say it's a good point?
It says disappointing.
Oh yeah, it is disappointing. Yeah. What's that other fancy word for that? Sucks. It sucks. But here we are. Do it anyway. You have a powerful. What is it called? I can think of it as a Pollyanna, but it's not one of those. What's it called? Not a polygram. Not a polymorph. What is it? Huh? Yeah, it's an algorithm. Thanks. Huh? Polly what? Polly Wally? That's strange coming from you, Don. So it's a model or a algorithm for how you could actually understand your life before it comes to a termination. Understand yourself, not believing in carved images. This is just to remind us who came along and told us this. We're not going to worship this. We bow because we need to pay respect to our Buddha nature, not to a wooden guy or to any images. So this algorithm is we take refuge in the teacher, the Buddha. We take refuge in the teaching, or simply put, everything is dependently arisen. Nothing comes from its own side as a separate individual self or being or object, dependently arisen, teaches samatha. And then there's all the other teachings along with that: emptiness teachings, no self, 5 skandhas, 4 noble truths, 8-fold paths, and so on. And then the last of the 3 is the sangha, the community. Probably the most important as far as the practice situation. You have to have a teacher. You can't connect, so it has to be a teacher. It has to be the Buddha, or it has to be a human being. And then there has to be a teaching. But the one that's often left out is how important the sangha is. The community of people that come together over and over and over and over again to study these teachings and support each other in understanding. I was very lucky to have a crazy community, but it was very powerful and very insistent and very consistent. And came together over and over and over again, week after week after week, month after month, year after year, to study what? The Dharma. Did we get anywhere? I can't remember. We did or not, but we did it anyway. Are you tired? Was that yawn because of my talk? Was too.
Pretty empty talk.
It is pretty empty talk.
No.
I tried to fill it up with various kinds of ice cream. I don't do that anymore. Ice cream. Further questions?
Choose something. How is just this not a singularity?
How's what now? I was thinking.
Just this.
Because if you set it up as a singularity, then it looks for something else. It looks for a singularity, but then it creates a lack of singularity. It's just more duality. That's why it's difficult. That's why it's not this, not that, not both, not neither. And that's why it's sandukai, the equality of sameness and difference. All the teachings are trying to take what is seen by someone who sees this and back up out of what they see into the 4th skandha and say, how can I talk about this? Perhaps they might say, Vasubandhu might say, how many verses am I going to have to write in order to point out that subject and object are words about something that doesn't particularly care about that duality? Perception. No perceiver, nothing perceived.
You said something like singularity creates not a singularity. So is just this both the singularity and not a singularity?
It is if you back out of the concept that is describing it that way and just look at it as it is, rather than some kind of concepts that helps you sort things out, which is what you have a tendency to do, right? Don't agree too easily. But don't you?
How do we see emptiness without trying to make things look transparent?
Well, you can notice that you're trying to do that, but you can also just look at the opacity. Look at how opaque everything, people, rugs, walls, the intense presence of otherness is where that's discovered. So just look at whatever shows up, look right at. And if you can, add nothing to it, what it is, what it isn't, and no evaluations, unless they come up dependently arisen, unless they just come up out of nowhere. You look at some carpeting and say, I really like red carpeting. Or you look at a person's face and who's coming at you, you've never met before, and you might notice that you immediately project onto them something about them. You have no idea who it is, but something shows up as a projection. Do not disagree with that. Don't agree with it, and don't ignore it. Then you're beginning to see dependent origination without the filter of personhood, without the validity or judgment of personhood. Someone who sees that or someone who feels that way. It's just dependent origination. It's just what occurs.
You're bowing. When you said don't agree with it, don't disagree, and don't look away, thinking about trying to do that when something's arising, there's a feeling of being frozen, like I can't move in any direction or I'll miss it.
What's your question?
Is there is that feeling of being frozen doing something with what's arising?
Basically, what's happening there is awareness, but then you're having second thoughts about it. So the feeling of being frozen is an idea about the awareness rather than the awareness. So I would say no repair work there. Don't correct it. Don't add to it. Don't subtract from it. Just notice what it is, and then notice the split second, just to use a time index between the time you experience it and then you name it frozen. My experience with that many years ago was that space became two-dimensional, and then I called it that, which wasn't incorrect, but it slowed things down quite a bit. Go ahead.
Future bowing. If something is empty, does that mean it's not opaque?
I'm not following. I heard what you said, but I'm not. What is it you want to know? Rather than, I don't want to use your words to describe what I'm about to say, because then it won't look like I'm as wise as I am.
Future bowing. I'm not entirely sure, but you use the word opacity to look at how opaque things look.
Yes.
If I see the emptiness, could it still look opaque?
Could. Yes. It could. It may. So opaque as a word means you can't see into it. Whereas transparent is you can see through it. You can see on the other side of it, even though it's there. You can see through it. Transparent. So 2 words describing some characteristic of phenomena. But even something that's transparent is still phenomenon. It's just not opaque. But that's helpful. It needs to be done. We don't want to get rid of the thinking process, but it needs to be done with the awareness, not just thoughts about the awareness, or thoughts about what we see, or conclusions or exclusions. And so that's an amazing teaching, 2,500 years of intense conclusions about everything. Life is suffering because of desire. So,
A question from Sarah in Kalamazoo.
yes, Sarah.
Are you still in contact with any of your original sangha?
Yeah. There's one right on this screen. John Roadhouse, right at the bottom of the screen. And I could name more, but he's the only one I can see here. He's just here to keep me in line. So if I say something stupid, he'll remind me later, you shouldn't have really said it that way.
Be careful.
What did I tell you? Go ahead.
She asks, how has the texture of those relationships changed over time?
Some of them have totally dropped away. I never hear from them again. And some of them, like John and I've been friends for 47 or 48 years. We've been in touch off and on over the years. And then there's a few other ones. Usually people just go their own direction. And sometimes if people know me as just another student and then see me functioning as a Dharma teacher, especially in a different lineage than Shambhala, might have some trouble with that. They might think, the guy never really knew anything, did he? What the hell is he doing sitting up there? A pretentious person. They could, I'm not saying people are doing that, but it could be. I don't know. I'm not going to win a particular popularity contest. I'm too concerned with it. My fundamental intention is to help people if they give me permission, and not to convince people I'm a sage or a living Buddha. I'm interested in reputation. As Trungpa Rinpoche says right at the end of the Sadhana Mahamudra written in 1968 at Tagshan, Bhutan, he said, I'm paraphrasing this, but he didn't say, may I live the life of a tantric master. He said, may I live the life of a bodhisattva. That struck me when I first read that half a century ago. Bodhisattva, save all beings, put others before yourself. How do you do that? I don't know, I'm still looking at that. Further questions?
Maria bowing. Do we maintain when we conclude?
What?
Bowing.
Maintain when we conclude?
Yes, do we maintain when we conclude?
I think there's a kind of maintenance there. If we conclude something, it's like an opinion, like, oh, that's what that is. And it's not that doesn't apply. Sometimes we just conclude that it's snowing out, so it's a kind of a conclusion. But when I say don't conclude, I know you can't help it. I can't help but conclude, but it brings your awareness more to that area of the mind or that is trying to get something, trying to conclude something. So when I say don't conclude, I can't stop concluding. But it's good to be very aware of that aspect of the consciousness that is grasping in a very subtle way about coming to a conclusion about something. Because that's just before the actual grasping, the more rough and ready grasping that wants something and demands something and is greedy about something and has to have power. So it starts out with a little conclusion. Someone left the door open. I wonder who did that. Conclusion. Simple kind of conclusions eventually build up into intense forms of control, manipulation, and abuse of people, including yourself. Less is better.
So if the conclusions are dependently arisen, is there a better way that we can relate to them?
So everything is dependently arisen. There isn't anything that isn't. But so just seeing that things are, this happens and that occurs and this happens and that occurs, and to slowly observe the self-centeredness that wants to align itself with this situation and back away from that one. I like this, but I don't like that. It seems that over time, observing that quality without trying to make yourself into a better, more accommodating, more it seems like that kind of takes care of itself. It's like one of the ways of the 3 pure precepts: do good, don't do harm, be with all things. Do good, that's kind of relative, and then we go into all kinds of philosophy about what is good, or don't do harm, might be too much to explain any of that. Be with all things. You could start out with just your own thought mind stream. Be with that. Don't disagree, agree, or look away from it. Be with all things. This is the way we save all beings, because every thought you have is a living being from the point of view of dependent origination. That's where they come from. This is where this came from. It might have been from millions of years ago. Here we are. A living being comes out of thought, comes out of a source that is unsourceable. You can't find that source. I'm watching myself on a screen back there. Is a time delay. Is that deliberate to make me feel more comfortable? Any other question? Just one more? Go ahead.
Shadow bowing. What keeps us from seeing our conclusions?
Sure, it shows up different ways. Just basically ignorance, ignoring what it is, or having a conclusion about the conclusion, like some kind of doubling up on it. It gives us some kind of artificial, temporary confidence about it. Does it connect with what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir, Don.
Don bowing. Does emptiness go beyond dependent origination? No.
Emptiness is dependent origination.
Don bowing. So is emptiness contained within dependent origination? No.
No.
Don bowing. Is emptiness contained at all?
No.
Is emptiness dependent on anything? No.
All right, you got me there. No.
Don bowing. Does emptiness arise simultaneously?
What do you mean by emptiness? You're using the word. You must know what it means.
I'm trying to work out what the word means.
Okay, good. And what was your question?
Does emptiness arise?
No. It would have to be something to arise, and it's nothing. Got it? Boy, I was starting to sweat. Don's a pretty creative fellow. Yes, madame.
Junju bowing. Can we perceive emptiness through the sense fields?
I think we get glimpses of that in different ways. I'll just characterize it this way. One of the ways of seeing emptiness is someone walks through the door and has a grouchy look on their face, and we immediately project onto them. So they must be mad because of what I said about them or to them yesterday. And as they come closer, you start to get ready to apologize, and then they say, "You're not feeling very good today." You realize they just have heartburn. So that is empty of your projection. So it's untrue. So it's empty. Your projection was right there. You thought this was true, and you were working with it. You're preparing your speech or your apology, and you realize that you're not thinking about that at all. Just a very simple way of talking about empty of what you impute or what you think. That is true with everything. That's a very simple relative one that you can point to. But that's true if you look over here and think and have ideas about who I am or what I am or what this is about. Empty, it's empty. What is actually here is empty of your imputation. Same direction here is empty of any imputation I have. So what's happening if I'm not imputing things? Is it possible to just not impute? Not do some guesswork on what's happening? It's a rhetorical question, therefore you have to answer it. You ever heard of Rhett Butler? Told you about Rhett Butler before?
I don't know. Sounds familiar.
He was in Gone with the Wind movie. His full name was Rhetorical Butler. That's how it was in the South. Painful, isn't it? The old guy will do anything for attention. Sir?
If emptiness is dependent origination, why frame it two different ways?
What are you accusing me of? How do you mean? Two different ways.
If emptiness is dependent origination, why are there two teachings?
Because emptiness is a teaching, and it depends on how that's being used as a teaching. Things are empty of what you think they are, but they're also empty of emptiness. Form is empty. Emptiness is also form. The same is true of feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness, as you know in the arts of it. But you can't find the reference point. So we start out with one like emptiness, and then that takes us down into that labyrinth where you can't particularly calculate anything. You're starting to smile. Is that good? Where are we at time-wise? Are we at the end of our? Take a couple more questions if there are some.
Don Bowing,
Yes, Don.
what's the relationship between emptiness and totality? Bowing?
So totality, of course, is a positive way of talking about the Buddhist teachings. It is a teaching, as has been said before, of totality. It's a positive way of saying it. So same thing. So emptiness is just to encourage any of us, for you or me or anyone, to look into what we think things are, whether it's right or wrong, up or down, back or forth, what they fundamentally are, just try to help us see that. And they're empty of any idea that you have about it. Questions? No more questions. Any more? I'll give you one more chance if you want to have another question. Kevin, you got another question?
Got me again. When you say that luminosity doesn't need to be maintained, is that the same as not making a demand on what we perceive, Bowing?
Yes. No demand. No demand. If there's any demand at all, there's issues dealing with suffering, dealing with the 12 links on the chain of existence, but just throws another snarl in the whole thing, instead of just respecting dependent origination. Since we're here and we're living beings, instead we try to squeeze some kind of happiness out of the relativity we see in front of us. And no demand. If something comes to you, enjoy yourself. If something goes away, enjoy yourself. If something comes back, enjoy yourself. When I say enjoy, I'm not just talking about pleasure, but the fundamental, as it says in the first reminder, free and well favored. You're free, you're a human being. The Buddha's already said this is suffering, so we know there's some difficulty, but you're free. You're free to be here and be a living being. So far, we're not locked up in a some kind of a gulag or something. Well favored in that we're not clogged up with a bunch of ideas about what life is about and things we have to believe in. Otherwise, we're going to cave of demons. So it doesn't mean that there isn't difficulty or frustration or suffering. Life is suffering.
Ivan bowing.
Yes.
Is emptiness the same as transparent thoughts?
You know, there might be something to that. The emptiness that's talked about is empty of our ideas about it. So if you're using transparent thoughts, transparent are still thoughts. So somewhat, the way you're asking the question, I would say you can stay with that. If you can use that to approach emptiness, then it would be all right to do it that way, the way I see it.
Okay, thanks.
Certainly. I think we're good. Okay, we'll dedicate the merit and we'll empty out the zendo.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shifu shi son bu sa moko sa moko ja ho ni. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, its buildings, gardens, and all adjoining areas from any and all dark or negative energy. Remove and dissolve any negative energy or devices. Fill everything and everyone with light. Please shield and protect with light our teachers, monks, students, and all practitioners of the Dharma, our families and friends from negative forces and energy from now on. Help us to realize the truth.